live now. David, we're live now? Okay. So, good morning. Ian, could I ask you to move over? I don't know if David's seeing on the yes, thanks a lot, because the camera was hitting me back. Thanks very much for that. Okay, good morning. Welcome to an impromptu, to those joining us on the live broadcast, welcome to an impromptu session of this show. My brother, Dr. Paul Elias Alexander, is in Trinidad for a couple of days, and we asked him to facilitate because people have been asking for a while to have an opportunity to chat with him and ask him questions. My WhatsApp number is 682-2110. If you want to ask questions via WhatsApp, you could send the message to me and I will ask him and you will hear his responses, because it's mostly a question and answer, but he's going to tell you what's on his mind about a lot of what took place during uses. Yeah. So you're not hearing me at all? I have to start over? Do I have to start over? No, but do I have to start over? Okay. You're going to hear a lot of what his thoughts are on a lot of what took place. We apologize for these little technical difficulties. We have to drag Satish and David out their homes. It's Easter Sunday to put this together, and I really appreciate it, guys. So, without further ado, I'm going to just ask him some questions, and I'm also going to make it possible for the audience here to ask questions, while those of you in the live audience, I'm going to send that link out now. So let me just give you a chance to speak your mind while we do that.
Well, just to give a quick background, and then you could start with your questions and whomever. So, first of all, I appreciate Philippa. I know what he's doing here politically in Trinidad and Tobago, but this opportunity to talk. And Philip is my younger brother. Well, first of all, one of our cousins passed yesterday, Brian Alexander, and I just wanted to say we mourn with the family. And the reality about it is that we've had 3 years of this COVID globally, Caribbean, globally, and you all know what has transpired. And we have many, many questions still. And I think a lot of the populations in the world, when we look at it today, we could say that we lost this pathogen, or this, let's say virus, this influenza-like illness, respiratory illness, took some people. They have no question about that. But exactly what remains the issue. But we lost most of our people because of the response, the lockdowns, the school closures, those interventions. But as we look at the data today, what we realize in the United States and Canada and UK and these countries that allow us access to data is that most of our people that we lost, most of the people who died because of medical management. They didn't die principally from the virus. They died because of access to the medical system and what happened in terms of how they were treated in the hospitals with the different protocols, extreme radical protocols that took lives, because these people were often very vulnerable and had issues. They were high risk, and the system just pummeled them. And with the isolation kills elderly people, vulnerable people, and the data is showing us that today with the sedatives that they gave the elderly, the midazolam, diamorphine, etc. The remdesivir, which we grew to learn was kidney and liver toxic and killed people. Those drugs kill people, and many of the people who died were malnourished and dehydrated because they were in this isolated protocol and often were not cared for properly. And in the end, many people were put on a ventilator, were not properly trained, and it damaged them and killed them. I mean, I'm using the words as we use today, even in North America, when people like myself and Dr. McCullough, etc., when we go on stage and we speak. And these are the things that need to be investigated by government. Well, not by governments, because they are the ones who implemented these, we call lunatic policies. But the evidence is there. We know of so many people who access the system and they passed away. It became clear that governments use any crisis to accrue power, and that's what governments do. They want to maximally get power, and they find ways to take the power from the population that they didn't even have before, and they use the crisis to get this power, and then they never give it back, and they maximally abuse us with it. And we have to find ways to get that power back, and we do that by going to court. So we do that in the courts because we are good governance people. We don't want to go to the street and engage in violence. Nobody would ever call for something like that. But we have to deal with it in the courts, and we have to deal with it in the ballot box. The ballot box is where you redress these issues. Sometimes it takes time, but we have to deal with it civilly and peacefully. I'll give you an example. There was about maybe a year and a half ago in Ontario, one of the premier there, his name is Doug Ford, he came up with a policy one day and said, from tomorrow or so, the local police of Toronto, etc., will be given powers that if you stepped out of your home onto even your driveway, that they could stop you. You could not go out onto the street. You would have to provide a good justification as to where you're going, and you only could have been going to like a pharmacy or doctor, etc. And the population went insane that day, and the police came forward and said that they're not going to enforce that. So the next day, the premier came back out with a breaking announcement that, okay, that policy is not going to be enforced. Now, from a medical public health point of view, that was an example of where a government and people in power abused the population. They were just probing, and they were going to try and implement that draconian policy that had no basis. Because had it have a basis, if that was a public health necessity, he did not have to reverse it. He could have, even under threat of law, imposed it because it was for a public health imperative. But there was no science or data to support it. They were just making things up as they went along. And in that case, the population said no, and he had to agree no. So that showed us that no science was supporting that. No medical data, no anything, just power. They could do what they want. And that's what happened across the world. Governments in Australia, New Zealand, and Britain, in America, they just did what they want. In Caribbean, they did what they want, and we just acquiesced it, and people got harmed because most of the lives we lost were due to the collateral effects of these policies. And so much so that another statistic is that when we look at the data in America as an example, with all that you hear by the CDC and the FDA and all of these talking head experts, we could safely say in places like Sweden and Germany, etc., in America, that we can't find a healthy child, a bona fide healthy child, that absent of any grave underlying medical conditions, who was exposed to COVID, got infected with COVID, and died. Any young person that you show who've passed from COVID died, that person was gravely ill, absent of COVID. And that's the key, and that's not the message that we got. We got this message to hide all your kids below the bed, and kids must get these vaccines. There's no data today, still 3 years out, that supports that any child, any healthy child, warrants getting this COVID gene injection. There is no science. I challenge any doctor, any scientist anywhere in the world. And what they turn around and tell persons like myself after we speak is that well, you know, the CDC told us, or the FDA told us, or the Ministry of Health told us, so we're just following. And that is where we have a serious problem, that the doctors in society hold the most prominent role in a society, even in a Caribbean island. It's supposed to be the preeminent position, and you have so much power in your hands. Yet, in this case, doctors seem to just go along with the government. They didn't question. They went along with the vaccine. They went along with the lockdowns. They just went along. And what they're trying to do now, what we are witnessing is they're running to the hills now, because the narrative has broken down, and the data now is becoming crystal clear that this was never really a pandemic. We never needed this vaccine. We could have managed the elderly, high-risk persons like how we manage them normally. We had effective early treatment drugs. Natural immunity is not inferior to vaccine immunity. It's actually more robust and bulletproof, even taking Omicron into account. So we know today that, I can tell you that the different groups that I work with, we've looked at all of the science when it comes to lockdowns, school closures, mask mandates, business closures, all of the shielding policies, and we could find no science, nothing, no proper comparative research, well done, high quality, that shows us that any of these worked. Nowhere in the world, nowhere in America, nowhere in Canada, none of the policies that were implemented worked. They didn't cut transmission, they didn't cut deaths, they just didn't work. So we have a situation now, we've had 3 years of policies. We have this gene injection vaccine, and we have a situation where the evidentiary landscape is showing us that none of it worked, because today we have the shot that is highly ineffective. It doesn't work on the new bivalent booster, has failed. It's driving the vaccinated person now to become infected, spreading and transmitting infection. It was never a pandemic of the unvaccinated. We knew by the data, the actual data was a pandemic of the vaccinated in terms of becoming infected, becoming hospitalized, ICU, and even elevated risk of death. So everything was a lie, and I'll say it that way. And my role in this as a contrarian, as a skeptic from day one, remember, I'm not trying to be an expert over any clinicians or people who practice medicine in Trinidad or in the Caribbean. I'm not. I'm just saying that the doctors in the Caribbean failed to challenge the government and to challenge the Ministry of Health and to challenge the Chief Medical Officer of Health and whomever as to where's the science or where's the data that underpins the policy that you're implementing and what you're saying. Because up to today, there's none. And they all know it. But here we are, 3 years out. We've had damaged economies, damaged lives, children damaged in terms of their educational progression, social development, emotional development, psychological development. And today you have governments now, and it's just like let's go on and let's just move on. And but we are saying in the United States and in Canada, etc., that we want accountability and we want justice. We want things investigated. Yeah, there's the cliche about so it doesn't happen again. Yes, but correct. But we actually want people to be held accountable. Why? Because from day one, we were giving them the proper science and data to show the policies and the decisions you're making were wrong. But they weren't interested. And, a lot of us paid the price because we were attacked in the media, smeared and slandered, etc. But today we are vindicated because the discussion now is right back to where we were in the beginning. So they've had 3 years to just ransack and damage societies and hurt people. We are saying, okay, let's move on, but we need this properly investigated to find out who did what, who got incentivized, who made money from the decisions, because many people made a lot of money. I mean, every day in America, there's a new announcement, or in Canada, about, oh, we just found this 300 million here, was this illicit contract that this one got in COVID, etc. So you knew from day one that this was a money-making venture, and that crooked people would find a way to benefit. So there are a lot of questions, and the challenge really is, from our point of view, is health and wellness. How do we move forward as a society? Shouldn't the public health in, let's say, in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, be focusing on health and wellness for the population, arming people with good information to improve your lifestyles, improve your living, cut your risk factors? Because at the end of the day, governments and doctors in the Caribbean and Trinidad showed you that they're basically incompetent, they're inept, and they really didn't know and don't know what they're doing, and they don't read the science properly. A lot has to do with they don't understand the science, they don't read it. Medical schools have failed, they don't give them proper epidemiology training. Doctors have told me, and it was shocking to me, 2 years ago, they said, Paul, we probably get a few hours immunology or virology in medical school. I was very surprised, and they said, we are learning from what things you all are saying, and we're reading now, we're going on the internet, and that was so very surprising. And so it shows, probably from high school, probably definitely from university, and definitely medical school, that this COVID has revealed a huge gap in terms of what doctors, their capabilities are. And I'm not trying to say anything negative on them. I'm just saying that we have to fix the issues. And there's so much discussion right now about the origins, the timelines. Was it a virus? What about this? We're gonna have things to talk about for decades to come. And I could talk about a lot. My background, my training in epidemiology and evidence-based medicine. I worked for the government of Canada for about 12 years as an epidemiologist, and posted in different countries in the world. But I also worked for the US government in different capacities, and the last administration. So I really had a different vantage point than everyone, in the sense that I was part of the prior administration's response and their policies, in the sense that on the inside, the record is there. I was at war with the CDC, the NIH, all of these people constantly, Fauci, Birx. We had a horrid time there. Myself, because of my opposition to most of what they were saying and doing. So there's a lot of history, and there are things that I cannot discuss, which you would understand, but there are things that I do discuss, and I have no problem sharing things to the extent that I can. And the next president of the United States is going to be very important to the world, because the United States put us in this situation. I've always argued it was the United States lockdowns on March 16th that the rest of the world basically followed. And it was the United States Operation Warp Speed, the vaccine and drug development that we were subjected to. Most governments in the world just accepted the FDA's emergency use authorization and implemented these vaccines, not doing their own regulatory research as they should have, and their regulatory approval. So we have rolled out vaccines across the world that were never approved in America, still aren't. And it's a situation that has never happened before. Governments have bought and distributed and implemented a medical intervention without the proper science or study. And it's just remarkable. And when you look back at it, it's just a terrible 3 years.
But the one question that I know coming out of what you just said that they're going to want to hear you speak to is that what happens with the next one? Because if the whole takeaway from this one is that those with medical authority abuse the medical authority, and those with political authority conspired to use that mishandled medical authority to their own benefit, how does the population trust any authority to come the next time they tell us that there is something coming that could affect us medically?
Well, I mean, I could take off that hat and just speak as a a citizen of. I mean, I'm in a unique position. I'm a Trinidad and Tobagoan citizen. I'm a citizen of Canada and a resident of the United States. So I'm speaking as a citizen in all three, a legal person in all three. I would say that you can't trust them now. Complete. You just can't. And you have to fight. From my point of view, I've been saying and speaking that those who've done this, first of all, they failed. So we have to get them out of office. That's a non-issue because they cause tremendous harms. And it's not even if it was deliberate. I think we have to get to that place that even if you made an error that is so egregious because the decision making was yours, it's like handling classified information. It's not so much that actual classified information was given from person A to person B. Even if there was an intent, even if the transfer of classified information didn't happen, the person who initiated must be held accountable at some point. That's the key here. So even if we come to a point and say, well, you know, these doctors and stuff, they just didn't know. And they were just following orders from the medical officer of health or the government. The government said, do this. And then the government of Trinidad and Tobago will say, well, you know, we were following PAHO. And PAHO will say, well, we were following WHO. And they all go around in this circle because no one wants responsibility when they did wrong. My view is, first of all, we have to get the governments out of power. Get those people who did this. We need justice. We need accountability. We need to impose severe financial penalties on all of them who did wrong. If we have to imprison people, I've always called for this in the United States, in Canada, we have to consider it's that extreme what they did because they costed lives. I think the loss here has been to the populations because now we can't trust. And that is the biggest loss because people look to doctors and scientists and as people that they could trust, and COVID has revealed the underbelly that many of these people are in it for their own development, their own progression, their own financial gain. And you know, you could say, was this just pure ineptness? They just didn't know? Or was this malfeasance, that they did wrong things too? I have been vacillating between both for the last 3 years, but sometimes I principally lean towards a combination of both, a combination of pure incompetence and a bit of malfeasance too, because I argue this way, you can't be that inept. There must be some level of corruption that you engaged in for you to get to where you got to. Because I'll give you an example. The data was clear maybe 1 month after the vaccine rollout in February or so of 2021 that the vaccine was failing. It was proving to be ineffective. It was not neutralizing the virus effectively, and the vaccinated people were becoming infected. We had outbreaks in around June, July of 2021 in Barnstable, Massachusetts. We had studies published in Israel, Finland, Vietnam, showing that double vaccinated people in the Delta era, so that was the Delta era, were actually becoming infected. They were double vaccinated, they were becoming infected. They were harboring viral loads much greater. These are the vaccinated people than the unvaccinated, and they were transmitting. And we were seeing that data among nurses in these facilities in all of these different countries. And we were also seeing something that was very shocking, because all of the nurses we found were fully PPE'd. They had the masks, the shields, the gowns, the whole works. Yet, nurses in these facilities and these different studies showed that they were becoming infected, double vaccinated, and transmitting to all of their colleague nurses and their patients. So it actually showed us that the full PPE didn't work either in the hospital setting. And it added to the evidence that the mask just didn't work for this respiratory pathogen. It just didn't work. And so the problem here is we've been speaking about this for 3 years, yet the necessary authorities have failed up to today to do the proper research. So we still have no proper randomized controlled trials looking at the effectiveness of these masks, these blue masks or white masks. And what we have, there are 2 trials right now, RCTs. I believe the Danish mask study and the one out of Bangladesh. And basically they've said that the masks essentially don't work. The Bangladesh one went from 0 effectiveness to about a modest benefit of about 11% reduced risk. So the overall body of evidence tells us, for example, that those blue surgical masks and the white cloth masks were just garbage. They were junk. They never worked. And they will never work for this pathogen, this type of pathogen. So, but we gave them the science, and they still kept imposing the policies. The governments knew that the vaccine was failing. It entered what we call negative effectiveness territory. People like Gert van den Bosch was out there explaining and showing that when you vaccinate a population in the teeth of a pandemic, when there's so much virus circulating, with that kind of infectious pressure on the population, with a vaccine that is not neutralizing the virus, you could only result in natural selection to select for more infectious variants, and you will have more infectious variants emerging. And we went through the whole Omicron, now we're at what, XBB 1.5.1, the BQs, all of these different variants. Due to the implementation of the vaccine itself. So we gave them this information right away. The governments knew, but it was almost as though, like in Trinidad and Tobago, it was, you must get this vaccine, you must be vaccinated, and children must get this vaccine. Yet when we showed them the science that children have a statistical 0 risk of becoming severely ill or dying from this, yet there's just, you need to give children the vaccine, and you take them out of school, and they can't do this or they can't do that, and they have to be barred from this. Yet the government had no science to show that the vaccine was needed. And when we showed them the science that the vaccine was not needed and the risk was so minuscule, absent even, they just totally disregard. And they impose legal justifications with the threat of the law, and they pull everybody out of society, and they shut things down. So these are the things why we need to understand, were people incentivized? Did people make money? What was the incentive? And I'll give you an example. I knew someone who had, and this clearly is what happened with the vaccine, in Canada. I knew someone who had an allergic reaction to one of the chemicals in the vaccine, the lipid nanoparticle that encapsulates genetic material. There are different lipids, ionizable lipids on the outer coat. One of them, and I know the population and everyone is probably so expertized and everything, so I'm not talking as though it's brand new information or I am more expert than you. I've realized that the population is more expert than even the scientists and the doctors now in actual immunology. So I'm just sharing now a story so you understand what people dealt with, and I suppose you could extrapolate it here. So this person, about 5 years ago, put some hair dye in their hair. It was a female, and they got a very severe allergic reaction needing emergency room attention because their face, like their whole head just swole up big, their eyes were shut. So a serious allergic reaction, and they were having breathing difficulties. So they went to the emergency room and they figured out eventually what was the problem. They were allergic to PEG, polyethylene glycol, which is one of the constituents of the lipid nanoparticle that encapsulates the messenger RNA. So the messenger RNA, which you know, and again you are experts, this genetic code is very unstable, and they had to devise ways to hide it from the immune system. And they did different things. I know you've read all of this before. You know, the uracil, they swapped it out and blah, blah, blah. But they put it in this lipid fatty ball. And that's what the key of the vaccine was. So you have been vaccinated with this fatty ball that contains the genetic code. The ball is to protect the genetic code and to allow longevity and to get that code to deep places in the body, across the body, so that all of your cells could translate the spike protein from the messenger RNA. So the thing is, so she had this allergic reaction to PEG. The doctor said, you know, you can't be exposed to this. So he treated her over the years. So when this vaccine came around, she's been reading, so she saw the PEG. So she went to her doctor and she said, you know, doc, I can't take this vaccine. Her organization in Canada, in Ontario, said, well, you know, everybody needs to get a vaccine to keep working. And she said, well, I am allergic, so I need a medical exemption. So she went to the doctor, and the doctor gave her a lot of trouble. So she asked me, next trip, can you go with me? And you talk to the doctor. I'll give you permission to talk to the doctor. So I went to the doctor with her. And so the doctor, you know, attending to her, and I'm there. And he pulled out her file and stuff. And he's even saying that he knows that she's allergic to PEG, because he has been treating her over the years. But the government of Canada, federal, and the provinces and the colleges of physicians and surgeons that regulate the doctors has informed him, as one of the doctors, that if he gives a medical exemption without vaccinating first, that he would lose his license. They will launch an investigation. They will fine him a certain amount of money. So he went and he brought the document, and it showed, and I read it. I was surprised that the College of Physicians is told doctors that if a patient comes to you and asks for a medical exemption, you have to vaccinate them for the first shot. First. Regardless of the situation, they have to react violently to the first shot, up until including potential death. And if they react with myocarditis, which is scarring of the heart, and I know you know all of that too, or anaphylactic shock or whatever, then you issue a medical exemption. Then that person is not a candidate for a second shot, and they could get a medical exemption. So the government of Canada, and this is same in America and same everywhere, made a policy for doctors that you must vaccinate. No medical exemptions. None. I even heard the Prime Minister of Canada one day on the news saying that it'll be very unlikely that anyone will get a medical exemption. So he was not a scientist or a doctor. Yet when he said that, when the vaccines came out, you know, it made you think, how could he know that? He have not attended to any patients. He's not seen anyone. Yet he knew that because it was their policy that they were implementing. And these doctors really did it. So the doctor told her that you need to take the shot, the first shot. And she said, well, doctor, I can't do that. And he said, well, let me explain it to you this way. And this is when I say we need to find out how they were incentivized, and we need to hold even doctors accountable and strip them of licenses either. He told her in front of me that it is your income versus my income. If I gave you this shot, I would lose my income. I would be fined and my license stripped. I'll be dealing with an investigation. She didn't take the shot. But what happened is this. The point I'm making is, she said, well, I can't take the shot. And he said, well, I can't give you a medical exemption. But he explained to her that I have to make a balanced decision here. It is my income versus yours. And he did it. And so here's the key. She went back to her workplace. She informed them that I couldn't get a medical exemption because the doctor did treat me, but he says he needs to give me the first shot. I don't want the first shot. I could die. Her work laid her off with no income, battling to get that back. I know the situation personally. My point is this. In America, because I know the data and the science, because I was involved in the administration, many of those women and men hung themselves after 5-6 months with no income. That's what, when people like me, McCullough, Reish, etc., go on a stage and we say we want investigations and we want people held to account, is because of those Johnnies and Susies who were subjected to those policies, forced under the threat of law or losing income, did lose income, and then committed suicide. Many people in America kill themselves because of the lockdowns, the school closures, and the vaccine mandate. We need to hold the governments to account. We need to hold the doctors to account because they knew better. Doctors knew better. They knew that that lady I just explained was not a candidate for that shot. But they hid behind this piece of paper that the college gave them. So they felt, well, it absolves me. And that's an example of, it's not a simple case because it spans the entire problem. Doctors hid behind the Ministry of Health, the Chief Medical Officer of Health. So they have plausible deniability and say, well, they told us to do this. And we assumed that they knew what they were talking about and they were following the science. And then they will now, the Chief Medical Officer of Health will blame other scientists. Somebody needs to be held accountable, and we cannot stop. We could chew gum and walk at the same time. We could open up fully and move forward as a society fully, but we need to hold people accountable. We can't just move forward and forget what was done. Why? Because people died as a result. This was not a simple issue. People died because of these policies. Because of that, people have to be held, because at least it was criminal negligence. They need to be held accountable.
I just want to remind those, David.
I want to remind those watching us on the live videos that you can ask your questions via WhatsApp to 6822110. I don't know if we're going to get a ticker tape on the screen, but you can send a WhatsApp to 6822110 and I'll read it out. And we're going to open the floor now for questions. And this gentleman wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, hello, Dr. Alexander. We have spoken before in previous interviews. Sharon Francis here. The question I have, recently, I think the last 2 or 3 weeks, he sent a testimony with Redfield, I believe he's ex-CDC director, on Rising. He was making a statement that basically that Fauci left them out of the decision-making process as to the origins of the virus. And because I guess he probably had a different view. I'm not too sure if he had any interactions with him, but what was also interesting in that interview, he made it very clear that the virus was man-made, and he identified the furin cleavage site and so on. But he also said that this is another one is coming, and he said in a very affirmative tone. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, first of all, full disclosure, I did work with Dr. Redfield. I worked with the task force, Dr. Hahn, Dr. Giroir, all of them behind the scenes, because my office was at the HHS, Health and Human Services, and Health and Human Services is the umbrella agency that all of the agencies, CDC, NIAID, FDA, report into. So during the pandemic, when I was there from May to October 2020, all of these agencies had sub-offices in HHS building, 200 Independence Avenue, which is opposite the Capitol building. And the reason for that is because daily, you saw the podium task force. They would go on the podium and speak with the president. So they had to have close proximity to the Capitol and where those presentations were made. They had to get into the Capitol building quickly, so just had to cross the street for hearings every day and questions, and to get to the White House. So that's why they were all there. Because of that, my office was on the 6th floor. I had the opportunity to work with them and deal with them on a routine basis. Redfield is I think is a good guy. My interactions with him were very scientific, pandemic related research that he has done. I personally felt that not personally felt, it was known that Dr. Redfield was under a lot of pressure internally at CDC, the high level people at CDC. So it almost like he was in a constant threat of coup himself, whilst trying to run the CDC. And I think that there's been a lot of stuff written about him in his work on HIV and all of that. My interactions and my work has been, I think, positive. I thought he was very weak, in the sense that he should have fired a lot of the top people at CDC because they were making catastrophic mistakes and errors in a lot of the policies that they were implementing, a lot of this junk that they were writing and putting out. That, remember, CDC does not impose law. CDC produces recommendations and guidelines. A guideline and a recommendation is not a law. It is not enabled by the threat of law or the force of law. They can't legally impose it. That's the disconnect. The population and even doctors in America and doctors across the world think, well, when the CDC writes something or the CDC makes an announcement that, oh my gosh, well, this is a legal issue. No, it's a recommendation, and that's why they do it and get away with it, because they know if you took them into a courtroom, they would tell you, I just made a recommendation. We just made a recommendation, and you didn't have to follow it, and that's the key. So the issue is, I mean, you're using the correct terms, the furin cleavage site and all of that, and I guess, and I know the population is very on top of a lot of the issues. We will always be under threat or risk of more coronaviruses and more pathogen. Why? Particularly with coronaviruses. Coronaviruses have been ubiquitous around us for hundreds of years in terms of us being able to track it. We have about 200 that we know of that we've typed. We know 4 of them are involved in regular seasonal common colds that we experience. OC29, etc. 229. So the thing is, this pathogen, this virus has an animal reservoir, and it's very different to like smallpox. We could have dealt with smallpox effectively because the only reservoir of smallpox are human beings. So once we could have dealt with it with the vaccine program that we used, that Dr. Donald Henderson and they implemented, we could have tamed that epidemic or pandemic. It is virtually impossible with today modern societies with our open porous borders. The fact that coronaviruses reside in animals, there will always be an opportunity for us to get into close juxtaposition and transmission to take place. The reality about it is that, look, it is clear now, there are many moving parts, but some things seem to be very stable, which is that if you look at the issues around the virus itself, this pathogen, let's assume this is what caused this emergency. There are things on this virus or in this virus that does not exist in other coronaviruses, that makes a more definitive declaration that it was not like a wet market spillover into human beings, that it was deliberately manipulated in a laboratory. And you mentioned the furin cleavage site that does not exist in the other coronaviruses, etc. We know of all of the research now showing that the NIH played a major role in funding Fauci, and they directly Francis Collins. Francis Collins is somebody we must not forget in all of this. That was Fauci's boss. And I think what Redfield, I don't think Redfield was not strong when he was there as CDC director. Those things that he's saying now, he should have said then. So I'm happy that he's saying what he's saying, but he's saying it too late. But the thing about it is that we know today that when you look at the whole body of evidence, that this was manufactured. The question is, I think the gentleman was saying earlier, deciding whether it was an intentional release or not. Because if this was intentional, that's basically an act of war. And that's a very serious place to go. That if we ever get to a place to say this entity or this country released this pathogen on the United States, let's say, that's an act of war. So that needs proper, serious investigation. We've been fooling around with the investigations thus far. But what do we know? We have some very curious issues. I can tell you I'm working with different groups today. And we're trying to evolve and to get the right language before we speak more publicly. So before we felt, well, this emerged in January, February 2020. Then we said, well, could be December 2019. Then we talk about the Wuhan games. We have data that showed us September 2019. We have evidence of circulation. Then new data has come to our attention of around June of 2019. And now we have additional data March of 2019. If you're talking March of 2019, we're talking about 2018. So the point is, and I have now been on record saying that I believe strongly that this pathogen, whatever it was we exposed to, caused this viral respiratory type illness, influenza type illness, was around for a couple of years before 2020. And I believe that a vast majority of the globe's population had some level of immunity already. And we know that when you look at, I'll give you an example, the Diamond Princess cruise ship, which I know you all are probably very familiar with. That was like in February of 2020. That cruise ship had a population of about 3,700 on it. And it was held outside because of this outbreak of this issue. And nobody could have gotten off or gotten on. We were dropping food onto the deck of the ship. So everybody was isolated in the ship. Yet, in a closed ship, only 19% of the ship got infected. So 81% were not. Yet 81% had the opportunity to become infected in a closed ship for a long period of time. In that 19%, only 7 or 8 died. The median age of the passengers was around 70. So these were not young people. These were older persons, more mature people, and many of them had underlying medical conditions. Yet, they were not infected, and they didn't get severely ill. We have we have evidence that in some cabins where there was a death, it was as a couple, where a husband got hot COVID, this pathogen, let's not say COVID, got hot infection and died in that cabin. Yet the wife that was with him did not get infected. In a 5x5, the inside of a cruise ship cabin, it's like 5x5. Well, how is that possible unless her immune system had seen that pathogen, some version of that, in the past? So that Diamond cruise ship was our petri dish and gave us, in February of 2020, that this was not a novel pathogen, that our immune systems had seen it at some level. I have a colleague, Dr. Stephen Pelek. They did a survey in 2020 in British Columbia, Canada. And what they found very early on was that 90% of the people that they sampled in the population of British Columbia, in Vancouver specifically, had immunity, had some level of immunity to this, that the immune system was exposed to it. So we had clues all along that this was not novel, it was not new. That meant you should not have locked the society down. That carte blanche approach was wrong. And remember, in the very beginning, we were working on the Great Barrington Declaration. You're probably all very familiar with it. Gupta, Kuldorf, Bhattacharya. And I wrote, Dr. Scott Atlas, he was in the Eisenhower building. I was in the HHS building. We wrote clearly, very early, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks out, because we began to get our arms around the data. So in March, April of 2020, we were saying, stop, no lockdown, reverse this. All you needed to do was to, if ever, you isolate only sick and well people, but you strongly protect vulnerable people in your society. But no forced lockdowns, no closures, no isolation, no mass testing at the border, no mass isolation at the border, no mass testing of society. You strongly protect the vulnerable, but you let the vast majority of society live normal lives, largely unfettered, open, because it is the way we've dealt with these things for hundreds of years. You allow the low risk in the society, the infants, the children, the teenagers, the young people, their immune systems could handle pathogen. You allow them to naturally and harmlessly, because we knew this was not a Nipah virus. We knew very quickly that the mortality rate was at seasonal influenza or lower. So it's not that I'm saying that we had 20% mortality or 10% mortality. We were at seasonal influenza or below. Today, the data shows the infection fatality rate is 0.05% for all those under 70. That's John Ioannidis' data, the best sero data that we have, updated data even. And in children, in young persons, 0 to 19 years old, it's 0.0003. It's almost zero. We can't find healthy people, young people who died of this. Can't find it. So the point I'm making is you allow the healthy in society to live and be exposed to. Okay, when I leave here today and you, each one of you, walk out of this room, in this room, but when you leave here, you're going to be exposed to different pathogen between here and when you get home. And your immune system, your innate immune system, your first line of defense, your existing acquired adaptive is going to effectively deal with it. You will even know that you are exposed to stuff. And that's the way it works. It's the way God has it. That's the way it is. So we did something very different with this. And that's why I keep coming back to investigations and as to why. I mean, we could sit on here and speculate, Reset and Klaus Schwab and all these morons in my mind, these bad people and people with these crazy thoughts. But I actually say they're legitimate in some sense, because it makes no sense what we did here. It makes no sense because children with a naturally innate immune system normally go to school, live, they get exposed to stuff, the immune system clears it out, deals with it naturally, harmlessly. The immune system of children we use to protect us, to protect the older person society and the vulnerable. So again, everything was wrong-sided, and when you had these doctors in Trinidad and these scientists and the chief medical officer of health talking their garbage about vaccine immunity superior to natural immunity and you must get this vaccine, but with no data. That's the point. You see, if today you ask them, go back and just show us the science, the data had accumulated already that the natural immunity was far more robust. Look, I wrote a paper recently reminding people, we have this publication from the Athenian plague. 2,500 years ago, the Athenian plague, where the language was translated into English, modern language, and they wrote 2,500 years ago that a line in there in what they were talking about when they faced the plague. I think it was 400 or 500 years BC, and one of the statements was that the men who were attacked initially by the plague were used to go out to retrieve the dead bodies and bring them back to, I suppose, bury them, do whatever you need. But the statement that they made was no one who was attacked prior was attacked again. That statement was natural immunity. That told us 2,500 years ago. We have a study people did published in 2010, around 2010, of the Spanish flu. And they looked at persons who are alive. They were about 90 years old at that point, who were children, young children, 3, 4, 5 years old, during the Spanish flu, and they were exposed. And what these researchers did was they looked at their blood and they did an immunological study to see how would their immune system respond to re-exposure after almost 1 century, 100 years, to Spanish flu. And it was the immune system responded. There was immunological activity and response to Spanish flu 100 years. That study showed us that natural immunity exists for at least 100 years. So when these scientists and doctors came around and said, well, we need to take the vaccine because, if you get infected, you need to take the vaccine so you don't get reinfected. There's no science anywhere in the world that shows that any vaccine ever can confer the type of robust, bulletproof, lifelong immunity that natural exposure immunity can. None. Because it's a basic principle. A vaccine is based on targeting specific antigens, targets on the virus. It cannot target all. Natural immunity, your body's natural immune system responds to the entire viral ball and all of the proteins and every single thing on it, inside also. So when your immune system naturally sees a pathogen, it sees the entire thing. So if 1 or 2 things are changed, if there are mutations, your immune system still recognizes it. If for this vaccine, this is why we said it would fail out of the gate. It gave the target to the vaccine. The target was the spike protein. The spike protein is the place on the virus that accumulates all the mutations. So the spike protein was changing constantly on its own, and because of the pressure that we are placing on it. Therefore, the vaccinal immunity would not provide that could have not provided that protection. And we've seen it. Today in America, the vaccine is dead. The booster is dead. The adults are not taking it, and the parents not giving it to their kids. It's dead. So we have countries now in Europe advertising that they're going to do burn dates. They're going to take all the vaccine and destroy them because the population said no.
David, we have a question here. What are the potential long-term side effects for those that have been given the first course 2 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine? And is there any way to purge the body of the vaccine?
Well, the thing is, all of these vaccines, this COVID-related shots, end up doing one thing. They end up, I would say it in a very simple way. They get to the spike protein so that your immune system could build an immune response to the spike protein. So the spike protein emerged very early on to be devastating in itself. It is the business end of the COVID. Again, we're assuming it's coronavirus. The spike protein, the SARS-2 coronavirus, is the toxic, deadly part of the virus. Spike purified, spike by itself, spike as part of the viral ball. it causes a lot of cardiovascular damage. We just put out a paper yesterday, neurological damage, etc. So the data is clear about the ravages of the spike protein. The issue here is that you need to ask the Chief Medical Officer of Health of Trinidad and Tobago, or the Ministry of Health, or the PAHO here, what is the science today that you are looking at that the Nordic countries don't seem to have, or America now, that shows that these shots should still be made available to the population? Because they have no science. There's no data to show you a benefit, number one. Number two, the spike protein, we have research that shows that whether it's the messenger RNA, whether it's the lipid nanoparticle itself that encapsulates the messenger RNA, whether it's the spike protein itself, the full-length spike or subunits, the S1, S2, we are finding that post-infection, so there's a good research by Patterson et al. He has shown that 16 to 17 months post-SARS infection, the spike protein and subunits persist. So we can infer and extrapolate from his research that same would be with vaccine. We have research, a very seminal piece in Cell by Rolken et al. Showed that the spike exists in germinal cells 60 days post-shot. We have other research, 28 days, 15 days. The point is that the idea, what we were told is, CDC had on their website that firstly, when you get a shot in the deltoid, it stays in the injection at the injection site. The immune response will be in the lymph system right here. We found out quickly, based on the Japanese research and data, the bioaccumulation data, and a bunch of other research, that no, the vaccine and the content and the mRNA and the eventual spike enters the lymph system, the blood system, and it gets all over the body. So that was a lie. Now the CDC has taken it down. The idea, what the CDC said was that the spike, etc., everything gets dissolved very quickly. mRNA gets dissolved in a matter of hours. We know that is a lie because we are finding the mRNA long-term now in the blood, in the system, in the tissues. So they've taken that down also, because as the science emerges, papers get published, CDC, etc., then removes prior statements that actually guided global policy. So we know that the mRNA, because ideally, normally the mRNA gets degraded by RNases, etc., one-off. The mRNA strand gets does its job, protein gets produced, and that's it. But with the molecular adaptations to the synthetic mRNA, it appears that the mRNA can be churning out spike protein, each strand, continuously 24/7. So that's a big problem. And the reality is, when we make statements like this, or we write, we can't be disproved because they have not excluded it. That's the key. They were supposed to, the vaccine makers were supposed to do the studies, provide the information to the FDA, and the FDA made decisions based on that. We have the vaccines authorized in emergency use, and all of the studies, particularly the safety studies, the oncogenicity studies, cancer, teratogenicity studies for teratogens at the fetal development stage, toxicity studies, they've not been done. So we have no safety data. We just going along with we went along with what they told us. And we have people, after we give conferences and we give rallies, coming up to us and saying, they have two things we want to tell you all. Every time we speak, we want to know how certain you are that you're going to get accountability and justice, number one, for all the lives lost needlessly. But number two, how do I get this out of me? And these are people who are vaccinated. And you want to tell them, well, you want to just tell them, say, well, okay, go and do this and go and do that. But the truth of the matter is, we don't know. We don't fundamentally know because it was not studied. We don't know how the spike will behave long term in you, because it's not theoretically. the spike protein is being produced by your cells 24/7. Number one. Number two, we have like the FLCCC, that group, Corey and Marek, and we have the Wellness Company and United States. They have come up with different treatment formulations to offer support whilst the data matures and develops, because we need to run clinical trials to see whether there's this substance, nattokinase. It's a natural fibrinolytic substance, a blood thinner, a natural blood thinner. It's called nattokinase. Short term is natto. It's getting a lot of play right now because a lot of the research that is emerging, I've read the research, shows that it plays a role in detoxifying and degrading the spike protein. Actually, we have research to show. You don't make policy on one study or two. You need definitive studies, comparative effectiveness research studies, long-term, larger sample size, etc., repeated research. So we need the proper research to verify that these sorts of substances, nattokinase, etc., that they are beneficial. But in the meantime, people are crying out for help because people have long COVID symptoms. They have all of these symptoms. Some people they were sold on it before and now they just want it out of them. Some people, I mean, no matter where I go, at the end, if we poll the group and say, can you tell me if you know of anyone who took the shot and had some side effects that was problematic, or may have passed? And often, almost 100%. I don't know of anyone today in my orbit that does not know of someone who took the shot and did not have a side effect that caused problems, or even people who died in close juxtaposition to the shot. So again, we need to study it, and it's very fascinating that these talking head scientists who say, well, you know, how could you make these statements? We've not studied it. Well, then we could turn around and say, well, then how could have you approved the vaccine? You did not study it. You know what I mean? They did the bivalent boost study the other day based on 8 mice. It was not even a human trial. It was a study based on 8 mice. And if you read the data carefully, the mice got very sick and they actually got COVID. So it was just bizarre, and the FDA gave the approval based on a study of a rodent study. So, you know, the population is so bombarded with junk, with misinformation, with garbage. And there is even misinformation on the anti-COVID, anti-vaccine side too. There's so much information coming at you. And there are all these different groups, everybody, you know, with their egos and their qualifications and stuff. And at the end of the day, the population people just want simple, honest information to make informed decisions. And I think today I've realized that 2 things. One, the population is actually more informed than the doctors and scientists. I think you have to trust yourself, make common sense decisions based on what's going on around you. But 2, I think these preliminary research on the spike supports that these different places coming up with, we have to try. And if you're making supplements, let's say based on things that already exist that are safe, and people come up with some concocted and say, you know, maybe we have to try, you know, once it's not harmful, I will try anything if it could be of benefit. But I'll clarify that and say, at no time must a pregnant woman or a breastfeeding woman take any substance, any biologically active substance, without getting good medical advice. No pregnant woman. 1, no one who's on blood thinners, existing blood thinning medication, should take any medication or any supplement that adds to your blood thinning, because you could bleed. So you need to be pragmatic about it. You know, you need to think about it and get advice too. Don't just make, you know, I wouldn't just go and give stuff to children and say, well, okay, well, this might work, so why don't we give you? No. Talk to your medical person too. Recognizing that your medical system failed you too. So, and this is the conundrum. We have a situation today where our doctors failed us. Yet they are the people we need to talk to make decisions. How do you trust them going forward today? You know, who do you trust? And we have in America, as an example, everybody trying to change their doctors and stuff. You don't have doctors because of many of them retired or whatever. So it's a tough situation. But you know, the most important thing right now is no Do you have another question?
You have a mic from there? Alright, if you want to stay there. How are you operating that, David? Just talk with it.
Let's talk. Greetings, everyone. My name is Umar Abdullah. I'm the leader of the First Wave Movement. First question. Would you be meeting with the Ministry of Health while you're here? The Minister of Health in particular?
Well, nobody didn't ask me to meet, but yes, I would always talk to anybody.
I think some effort should be made for you to meet with these people, because these people, I don't know, you need to knock some sense in their heads. Anyways.
Umar,
yeah.
In the beginning of this COVID, we offered for him to meet with them.
Uh-huh.
And we offered for him to meet with them when the contradictory science was available. And they turned that down then, and it was clear that they had no interest in science. They had interest in an agenda.
That's the key.
That's what he's talking about now.
There's no harm in making another effort and recording the response of that effort.
Well, I mean, I'll have to go on record and say that initially, even when I was in the U.S. government, I reached out and I had communicated with the Prime Minister's office, and the Chief Medical Officer. Who's the Chief Medical Officer? He was the Chief Medical Officer of Health then, and we communicated about me providing information about early treatments and different issues, and requesting a meeting. And I think it'll sound funny, but I'll tell you full disclosure. I was asked a question. We were going back and forth, and the question from one of the aides to the Prime Minister in an email was, "Are you by any chance related to Philip Edward Alexander?" And I responded, "Yes, that's my brother." And that was it. I got no more communications after that.
By association. By association. Anyways, just to get into the meat
I
of
don't like when
the...
you blame me for these things.
No, but I telling you what happened.
Well, I was actually, the Minister of Health actually sent special branch behind me 4 times. I was arrested 4 times. I have 2 matters before the court. One for leading a march illegally around the savannah without police permission, and the other one for congregating more than 10 persons. I don't see those matters going anywhere anyways. The point is, you made mention earlier, we need to trash this out in the courts.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I'll tell you something. We live in a very peculiar jurisdiction here in Trinidad and Tobago, because in the very earlies we would have contacted 2 prominent attorneys. I wouldn't mention their names here, but just by familiarity, person sitting in the room would probably guess who those 2 attorneys are. They don't ever lose cases in Trinidad. And we went through extensively with these 2 attorneys to take these matters before the courts. From some, using some position or from some angle of, we explored it. At the end of the day, one of the attorney constantly, reluctantly refused to engage. And the other one bluntly said it was political, and it will end up being a political issue in the court. Now, we have 2 main parties in Trinidad and Tobago. The political party, PNM, which is in power, and the opposition. And people who know the history of Trinidad and Tobago, we have basically a 2-party state. either the opposition or the...
I just need to interrupt you to say that we have a racist voting pattern.
Right. Well,
And the PNM and the UNC have exploited racist voting to their benefit and to the benefit of their financiers, and that is changing.
Right,
Let
and
us
you're
not
correct.
use this opportunity to make that a
yeah, and you're correct. All right, but what I'm saying is that we've had instances where the opposition would have damned the government for not moving fast and quicker in getting the injections here. Recently, we had the leader of the opposition asking the government, all right, why they're not forcing more injections and putting more implementing more stuff in place and that sort of thing, and begging the government to respond. And obviously the government is doing what they're doing. It's extremely difficult for us to take these matters before the court, to attract any attorney in this country to take these matters to court. Now, we have a lot of matters before the industrial court, all right? And you are involved in one of those, all right? Quite recently, you were contacted by one of our attorneys, and we have a particular matter before the court, the industrial court, which we hope that we're in a very good position, and we're hoping that we'll be able to win that matter. Hopefully, we'll be able to push forward a number of the issues forward in the industrial court, not necessarily in the main courts. My question to you is that, in a jurisdiction as ours, how do we move it in a direction that will take us to the courts, the main courts in this country? And I quite agree that we ought to be looking for peaceful resolutions, a peaceful way of addressing these issues and calling to account these persons. We, the First Wave Movement, would have submitted a criminal report to the police, the Commission of Police, to investigate the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health and all those persons involved in the lockdowns and what it is they have perpetrated over the last 3 years. We have people coming forward who would have signed indicating their willingness to come forward. Those who were adversely affected after taking the injections and persons who would have died, their families, they would have signed that document. We submitted those to the police. Not a single response from the police.
I need to interrupt for a second because you're asking him what are legal questions. And he can't answer legal questions. You put him on a spot.
No. I'm not asking him a legal question. I'm asking him...
You ask him how you get it to the courts.
No, but that's not a legal question, right? That is not a legal question. That is a method question. A question of what method would he suggest that we use in our district. He has a lot of experience, traveled all over the world, and he would have obviously had experience.
Yeah, but Umar, I have to protect him here from a question that he's not qualified to answer, even if he's seen. You're looking for anecdotal support for what you're trying to do, and he can't give you that. And I apologize that we don't have a lawyer present on the panel, but it was real short notice. If you and whatever and any assistance we can give you, we will, to get legal representation that could take it to court. His job, his role, and he's offered that role worldwide, is to provide information to debunk what the government and the law enforcement and the courts have done. That you could get from him, but you can't get him to speak on how our courts work, our jurisdiction works, or how to get it before the courts. He can't even answer that.
Well, actually, I was trying to get out of him how can we attract the attorneys, because when we had the conversation with the attorneys, we discussed a number of things and we brought forward a number. We told them that we have the evidence. I even mentioned to them that we have Paul Alexander who's willing to come on board. All right. Now that you're here physically, I'm hoping that I could engage the attorneys once more and try to see if we can get a meeting with the attorneys, so that this discussion could really bear some fruit.
Yeah, and what Philip said is true, and I'm glad he clarified that. And the key here is this: that in a lot of those countries across the world, whilst the doctors stood on the side and fail to treat properly patients, because that was one of their main issues. They, for the first time, had people coming to them with symptoms, sick, and they sent them home. And a lot of the people who pass away because they were high risk and needed some interventions quickly, some medical support. And in the United States and Canada, the dictum was go home for the next 2 to 3 weeks, and only if you get severely ill, then come back and see us. So, normally doctors employ broad empiric treatments. They try everything. They don't send people home with nothing. And but now what we're seeing is lawyers and stuff in America and Canada beginning to get brave. Whilst doctors stood down, now they're beginning, because the narrative has folded. So now we have some of them coming forward and asking us for amnesty. They're using that word and saying, so what these doctors are doing is they're getting these high-level writers to write these pieces in these op-ed journals like Newsweek and The Atlantic and stuff, saying, well, you guys, people like me, Dr. McCullough, etc., you should have a little mercy. You should grant the medical profession amnesty, because doctors really didn't know what they were doing. They were not that informed, and they were taking instructions from their ministries and their bosses, etc. So don't hold them to account. And we are saying no. There's no amnesty for anyone. Everybody must be investigated properly. Anyone who made policy, who made decisions on COVID that ended up costing lives, have to be investigated as to what was your role, how did you yourself benefit from those decisions, etc. We may find out that some of them were just purely clueless, didn't understand the science, couldn't even read the science, were just academically sloppy, intellectually lazy, and just didn't bother to even read a study. I have some scientists and doctors told me, Paul, I have to tell you, and quietly, I never read one paper, because all I was doing was listening to the CDC. I never even read it. When you shared it, we didn't even open it. So that's the kind of insanity that we live. And what I'm saying is, we have lawyers today in America who are standing up now, and they're becoming brave. Lawyers themselves shut down throughout the pandemic in fear of losing their practice and being ostracized, etc. Let me explain, because I'm sure it's being done here. It's how I can speak in America and Canada. Sometimes when you have a very provocative high-level case, and you are the litigant, then you are the person in society wronged, and you decide, what, I go into the courts, so I going to take legal redress, and you say, so I'm not going for any low-level, just out of law school lawyer. I want a top dog. So you do your research, you come up with your list of the 30, 50 lawyers who's deal in this area and who are the best. And you say, well, I might be able to afford it, but let's see if they can help me pro bono. They'll win a high-level case. When you start calling them, I was shocked. I've seen how it works. They all tell you one by one, well, the government already contracted me. Case hasn't even started, but the government solicits their help, ties them up in a contract, binding contract. So now you go to all the lawyers, and you get to find out, well, the government already retained my services on this issue, so I'll be conflicted.
So you could see that our jurisdiction is not alone.
No, that's how it works.
That's how it works.
And it shocked me, but that's how it works. Now you have some lawyers who realize, wait, we have serious problems here. And I'm a lawyer, and I took this profession to right wrongs. So, and some of them standing up under the threat that they probably going to be ostracized and lose their profession, but they are willing to stand up. And these are the people that we're going to find. We're going to reward them. We're going to showcase them and put them on a pedestal for being strong. That's why we're calling on the doctors and scientists, stand up, because we will find you and we will showcase you and celebrate you. You will be rewarded. You will be rewarded. I'm not even saying money, but you will be rewarded by the recognition, because you a warrior who stood up against the fraud system in this matter.
And Omar, I want to say to you also what he's saying there. If you're looking for Trinidadian bandwagonist attorneys to stand up, they're going to wait for their successes abroad. So that team that working in Canada and the States, when they get victories, because it's not going to take as long as it takes in Trinidad, and when they get victories, that is what will encourage local attorneys and embolden them to want to take up matters.
Honestly, I hope that would happen. But as I said, I will try to engage them again, and let me, as you hear.
Yes.
But there's two things I want to end with. Quite recently, our Minister of Education, Gatsby Dolly, had indicated in an interview that she's hoping that every child in our school system gets the injection. We haven't been there yet, but she's hoping for 100%. And just a couple of days ago, we were in front of the Finance Minister's office in Maraval, where we had received reports, credible reports, that he's insisting that people provide their injection card before they come to see him. So he's refusing to see his constituencies. If you didn't get the injections, he's not going to see you. All right? So that's the level of stupidity, right? And foolishness that we reach here in Trinidad and Tobago. And constantly we have ministers in government baiting people. We had the Minister of Education, the Minister of Health recently said, when we were begging parents to take their kids to take the injection, they didn't want to go. He lied and tell the nation, now they're knocking down my door, asking me, what to do, etc., etc., as if to drive fear into the hearts of the parents that you need to go and get your kids this injection, etc., etc. And they continuously do this to the population and, bait the people to come. And it's happening in the schools. Children are getting sick, and they're driving this fear factor that if you don't get your children injected, your children is not going to fare well. All right, so we have a very serious situation here in Trinidad and Tobago, and I must say thanks to you that we were able to drive a lot of the misconception away. All right, a lot of the material that you've been sharing and so on, I get your stuff every day in my email, and I use whatever I can use to try to talk to people and encourage them and inform them and so on. And quite recently, your willingness to to come on board in this matter before the industrial court is very commendable as well, and I thank you for that publicly. And I don't think we can thank you enough, being a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, for the enormous work that you've been doing across the globe with regards to sending this message loud and clear to everyone that this is in fact what is the truth, and we need to rise up, we need to step up, and we need to fight back and reject this narrative that governments all over the world are pushing on its citizens. All right, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Omar.
Okay. Hello?
David.
One? No.
We're not hearing it through the speakers. You said just
Okay. Thank you, Paul, for being back here again. Last occasion you came to your dad's funeral.
Mm-hmm.
This occasion it wasn't planned, but a cousin has passed away. So I would like to take this opportunity, because I don't think you'll be coming back for the third strike.
No.
Okay.
I hope it's
Since
not a
you're
pattern.
also dressed in black. So I think you can dispose of that jacket.
Mm.
Just to pivot you back to your comfort zone, have you had the opportunity to read Robert Kennedy's book, The Real Dr. Fauci?
Yeah.
And if you could just share a few thoughts on that. And I don't want you to wade into the politics, but how was Dr. Fauci able to traverse 2 administrations and continue to do all that you said has been done? Thanks.
Well, okay. So, first of all, Robert just announced that he is challenging Biden for the nomination because he wants to run for president. And I know Robert Kennedy personally, You could see that we've had interviews together, and when we did defeat the mandates in Washington, that rally, I spoke on stage with him, and I think he's a really remarkable individual. I think he's a good guy, and he has been fighting this crusade against the vaccines entirely, not just COVID. He has serious questions, like myself. Originally, all my kids, myself, Philip, we all, growing up here in Trinidad, we got vaccines out our yin yang. I mean, our parents gave us every shot possible. When I was traveling for the Canadian government, I mean, everywhere I went, I had to get all sorts of Japanese encephalitis shots, all sorts of stuff, and I never really questioned it. I was one of them too. That part, I said, I'll stay in my lane. The vaccinologists, they wouldn't bring bad stuff to us. But what I have seen happen with COVID, and the fact that the FDA authorized under emergency use, is not even a vaccine. This is not a vaccine. This is a gene delivery platform. This is what this is. Something that we now have data shows reverse transcribes back into our DNA, the messenger RNA. That has huge implications for humanity. That has to be dealt with, properly investigated and dealt with, because that could have catastrophic consequences. So now when I've seen what they've done, when I've seen the harms from the shot, the myocarditis, pericarditis, especially in young males, now we have data, a good study out of Basel, Switzerland by Mueller, showing us that young girls have about 30 to 40% myocardial lesions per shot. It's not just males anymore. We have all these reports all of a sudden in the airline industry. United Airlines, American Airlines, etc., Arab Emirates Airlines, where pilots have gotten cardiac arrest just before the plane took off, loaded with 200-300 people. Some now have gotten cardiac arrest after the plane landed, and 2 have died in cockpit. Thank God the second person in the cockpit was able to manage matters. That's a serious issue, because the thing that we've been trying to raise, and I'm not railing against the Prime Minister of Trinidad Tobago. I'm just talking about the facts here. We have a situation of something called silent myocarditis, where myocarditis is not a mild, rare issue, in the sense that they try to tell us that myocarditis from the virus is more prevalent than the myocarditis from the vaccine. Actually, it's in reverse. And the problem is that the myocarditis is very silent, meaning you have no symptoms. And often where that heart scarring takes place, there's no more electrical conduction there. The heart is not behaving normally, but because your youth, especially in young males, we see the ages between 15 to 24 as the principal risk group. The heart will compensate and the system compensates, but what we're seeing is all of a sudden there have been some deaths in sleep. Young people and even middle-aged people have died in their sleep just before dawn, just as they were rising, and that confused us. We didn't understand, well, why would people die in their sleep? And the common thread was vaccine. And then when we delved further into it, and McCullough has written, I have written, Dr. Daniel Stock have written, we've said that when you are rising, and we see this physiologically from around 3 a.m. to about 6 a.m. in the morning, the body releases into the blood system what we call catecholamines, so adrenaline, to lift the blood pressure, to lift the breathing, to lift the heart, because you are rising from sleep. In a situation where the heart muscle is scarred, the myocardium has some scarring from the shot, so it's myocarditis, that flood of adrenaline onto a heart that has scarring places the heart under duress and strain, and that's when the heart begins to beat erratically, and the person could get cardiac arrest. So when that footballer in Buffalo, Damar Hamlin, dropped on the field, we still argue, Dr. McCullough, me, Stock, we've written and we argue that unless you could prove to us that he was not vaccinated, and unless you rule out and exclude myocarditis, we still insist that it's vaccine-induced silent myocarditis that caused his condition on that field. And it's a condition that arises both from sleep, when you're rising, as well as when you're exerting yourself, because in both circumstances, it's paradoxical. There is a flood of adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine into the bloodstream for you to cope with the stress you're under. So if you're an athlete, that's why we've seen athletes dropped on the field, because we're saying it is in all likelihood that they had what we call silent myocarditis, and with the exertion on the field and this flooding of adrenaline, it places the heart under stress. And we bring it back to the pilots, and we say, well, why would these pilots just get these cardiac arrests all of a sudden at numbers beyond what we expected? So what we are observing is beyond what we expected. And it makes sense because pilots are in a very stressful situation. They manage a craft beautifully, and they always do what they need to do. But remember, if they encounter wind shear or turbulence, they're not dealing with it in a normal way. They must be under stress. If they have silent myocarditis, that stress in the cockpit could be a recipe that is causing these elevated numbers of cardiac arrest in these healthy pilots. That's why we wrote this paper recently calling on the FAA in the United States, calling on the NTSB, calling on the airlines, the different airlines in the industry, that you must now, it's very cheap, it's not expensive, you must rule out myocarditis from all your pilots. You must do the proper testing before pilots take to the air again. And we even went as far as say, if you are young, if you're a parent with a 15-year-old, 16-year-old boy, even girl, and they're athletic, they belong to soccer team, but you vaccinated them. If it were my child, because my kids are not, it would be prudent of you to demand of your clinician that they test for myocarditis. Test their blood for myocarditis. The D-dimer test, the high sensitivity troponin test, EKGs, do whatever you need to do. Rule out myocarditis before that teen takes to the field, because we have instances, we have many instances in Canada and America where they have died. So I'm just saying this as a public service. And back to Fauci and back to Kennedy. I think Kennedy is really a good individual. His book was prolific. It was profound. Basically, what he said in that book is the fact. I mean, Fauci has been devastating to the United States public service. Devastating. From in the days of the AIDS crisis. I mean, he blocked the provision of Bactrim, which is a very potent antibiotic that would have saved thousands of lives within the gay community. And in lieu of AZT. AZT turned around to be a very toxic drug that killed many of the homosexual community. So that blood is on Fauci's hand. I have no question. I say it everywhere I go. And I challenge him constantly. And I think that you ask a very important question about how come. Well, it's simple. If you look at the United States, the NIH is the umbrella agency that the NIAID gets its funding from. The NIH is the umbrella agency in America that all universities, all research institutions get their funding from, directly or indirectly. So they even fund sub-funding agencies. So if you think, well, I as a researcher, I apply to NIH, and Fauci and me have been on loggerheads because I've questioned him and he put me on the naughty chair. I could get no funding from the NIH direct, but I go over here, you would get to find out that over here gets their funding from Fauci. And that's what has damaged COVID-2 and Fauci. What they did. Over the last 40, 50 years, Fauci has been at the head of NIAID and in charge of making the decisions for the funding. So all of the universities in America and all of the research institutions and all of the doctors and scientists, many doctors, it doesn't operate like that in Trinidad, but I'll tell you how it works in America and Canada. Many doctors who are practicing bedside medicine are also doing a little research on the side, using their patient group, their patient list of all. They research their data. They try to write a paper or two. Many scientists and doctors who attach to universities run research labs. The bread and butter of their livelihood is funding. They spend their entire day writing research grants, or their interns and their students, doctoral or master students writing their grants. Their life is that. They bring the funding to the university. The university matches the funding, etc., etc. Can you imagine the United States gave the NIH about 50 to 60 billion a year, US. They're funding in all sorts of different ways. Think about that for 40 years. You're talking about trillions of dollars. Can you think of one individual in America, anywhere, that ever had that allocation of money over 40 to 50 years to distribute? And how many favors and how many people that are indebted to him? And that is why no one could have done. That's why you say, but okay, baby, 3 years in this pandemic, no one has done a proper randomized trial on masks. They've imposed masks. No one have really done a randomized controlled trial on lockdowns, the benefits or risks, or school closures, or anything, or even these drugs. No proper randomized controlled trial have been done on hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. None. We rely on some of them good observational research, but no one is doing the research because no funding agency would fund it. Because if you did that, you're persona non grata with NIH. And that's the hold that Fauci and they had, and that's how they. It is corrupt. The research grant for situation in America is so corrupted it should be burnt down to the studs. Fire many of them because they've corrupted science. They've corrupted journal publishing. We can't even publish. We publish scientific papers as op-eds in different op-ed magazines, because when we publish, we get rejected. McCullough and Kostoff, and they wrote a paper on myocarditis about 1.5 years ago. So I'm all part of all of these groups, so I know exactly what took place. Let me explain to you how profoundly corrupt it is. It's never happened before, but it happened with us. So we wrote this paper on myocarditis and the risks to teens, submitted it to journal. The journal wrote back and said, well, we need reviewers because nobody wants to review it. Because, of course, you are raising questions about the vaccine. So now, we now have to find reviewers for them, doctors and scientists. So we went about, we wrote a bunch of people and said, would you be willing to review this for this journal as an independent peer reviewer? We finally found 3 who said, yeah, okay, blind reviewing. So, okay, well, at least nobody will know my name. Let me do it anonymously. So we submitted their names. The journal took it, sent the paper to them blindly, and they reviewed the paper. They accepted it for publication conditionally on a couple of little tweaks to some words. Nothing major. Accepted provisionally. Already accepted. Just make these edits and publish. The journal sent it to the editor, and the editor accepted now complete when we made the edits. The edits were made. So the paper now is accepted by the 3 reviewers, accepted by the editor, and now went to the journal now, the publisher, and publish it. Put it out on PubMed, Medline. So you know in the medical field, that's where you find all of the research. So our paper is out there, the paper is out there. We started to speak about it at conferences and refer to the data because it's a published scientific paper. All of a sudden, 5 days after, it disappeared. It's gone. We've never seen that before. So Dr. McCullough, we started to investigate and inquire from the journal, a medical journal. And we've come to find out that the pharmaceutical company, I will not tell you which one, put muscle on the journal, and the journal pulled the paper. Never happened in history. Right now, Dr. McCullough has taken legal action against that journal, fighting them in court to get that reversed, because that is academic fraud. But they did it. It's their journal, but they did it. But that's what we faced during COVID. We faced that kind of censorship, canceling, work madness, and it harmed the population because that is information that a parent should have had to make their informed decision. And that's what killed people. People weren't given the information to make informed judgments of what is best for me. These people just made sure that all of our science was shut out and only their version was put out, and their version was incorrect. And that's the problem. So that's why when we keep saying we need the proper investigations, because their decisions harmed people and killed people. And if you kill people, you need to be held accountable. You need to be investigated and questioned. We may find out that you didn't really do anything willfully wrong. You were just stupid. You were just not properly educated. You were just inept, right? You had no malfeasance. That's a different question than if you show too that you weren't just stupid and inept. You were corrupted and you were malfeasant. That's a different story. We need to figure out where it falls, because people died, and that's the point. We all have lost people, so we need people, and we need to punish them. We don't just need to investigate. We need to punish them. Right now in the House, if you look at the news almost every day, the U.S. Congress, there are investigations every day. The House Select Subcommittee brings Walensky, brings Fauci, blah, blah, blah. I have to be honest, full disclosure, I was approached by the House to provide the questions and to provide stuff to move that along. So I'm playing a role. We play a lot of roles behind the scenes. And I am dissatisfied right now with the investigations because these guys come up there and I can't answer that question right now. No. I'm unwilling to. Well, I don't have the information to answer that. So it's like a game. It's like a dog and pony show, and we don't want that. We want proper investigations, proper questioning, etc. So, and the key, sir, is that people like me, because we put our necks out 3 years ago, we've lost a lot. A lot of us lost our careers. We can't stop now. That's the problem. So the problem for the other side is you stripped us down, and those who remain standing, well, if I have nothing more to lose, you're going to have to deal with me technically and scientifically, and that's where we are. So we are not going to stop. Yeah.
Okay, well, this was supposed to go till 1 o'clock, and we're a little after 1. You don't take any more questions at all? He has airport schedule, so that's the problem. Yeah? You have any closing comments you want to make?
Well, I mean, look, like I listen to Mr. Abdullah. I find him a very interesting individual. Very. I am so grateful. Like, I'm a Trinidadian first. I tell people that always, you know. A Trinidadian Tobagonian. Can't forget Tobago. And, you know, I have had the opportunity to be on the international stage, largely because of my education and the work experience that I had, and I just ended up there. You know, people say, "Oh, how come you come from a little island in a little part of Trinidad? We never even heard Diego Martin, Woodbrook. Where's that? Where you know?" So you deal with all of that, you know. But I'm very proud. I'm very humble and privileged to have Philip as a brother doing what he's doing. You know, hammering at the government, because at the end of the day, I'm not saying people don't have good hearts or what, and I'm not saying human beings, these people are bad people. But what I'm saying is that their policies and their decisions are hurting and harming people. And if you can't do the job, you need to get out. And if the only reason why you're in the job is because you incentivize and you benefit and you have to maintain status quo, you need to get you out and put the right people there. I mean, I can't tell you. I went outside 29, 30 years. I mean, I've been back and forth. I tried to live back in Trinidad twice. I may come back fully too. But I can't tell you, every time I leave the airport and drive back to Woodbrook or to Dago or Petite Valley or wherever, it shocks me that every single thing that I faced as a child still remains. And the landscape still, I mean, yeah, you have Woodbrook now as like a big commercial place. But I mean, the drive, you know, like, it's almost as though government after government, regardless of who you place, they will not do anything for the poor person in society, for the struggling person. And it is clear that there are two societies in Trinidad: the very rich, and the capable people, and then the poorer people. I don't understand how people survive right now financially, with the cost of everything and the crime, and so it breaks my heart every time. And but I'm a Trinidadian and Tobagonian, and I wanted to fix, and I hope in the future the right people stand up and come forward. And I think Trinidad and Tobago is worth saving as an island. It's in a lot of trouble, and this COVID thing was an example where we just have pure ineptness in the government, pure ineptness in the Ministry of Health, all of those people involved. And I want to close by saying to doctors, listen, I've never questioned your ability and stuff. I'm saying you abdicated your role in using your clinical judgment in treating people properly, in treating your patients, and many people died because of that failure. You had proper treatments available to you. You still do. You were wrong to just pivot to a vaccine and not allow people to exercise their natural immunity, given what the evidence was since the beginning of time. So many things that you did, you were wrong to not challenge the government and the lunacy of the lockdowns. You were just wrong on the school closures, on the mask mandates. You were just wrong. If it is that you didn't read the science or understand it, you need to get on top of the science quickly. And you need to stand up, doctors. You have a prominent, the most important role in society. You need to stand up and defend the population. Your role is to save lives, principally. That's what you're doing. So you need to, you don't let no bureaucrat or technocrat in the Prime Minister's office or the Ministry of Health tell you how to practice your clinical judgments and what decisions to make for your patient. The decision is always yours. The decision is between you and your patient. No bureaucrat could get into that patient-doctor relationship. You allow them there. You allow them in, and you need to take it back. You need to fire the government, take back control of the medical system, and stand up. Stand up for your patients, and that's what I want to say.
Well said, and I'd like to thank you for making time available for this. I think he deserves a round of applause. Yeah. I know a lot of people frustrated with the system want radicalization. When you talk and we hear how frustrating it is, how you could lose your career and how people at the top could manipulate and control funding and use that funding to cost lives. We live in a country, everybody in the room, they could tell you, social media, traditional media, they lock you out. Being able to raise an issue in Trinidad and Tobago right now, where the government is in bed with the 1% that owns the media, only their message, the fact that Trinidadians still stand up is a testimony to the strength of Trinidadians. But everything you said, you're correct, and I wish that our people could hear more of people like you who are willing to put their lives and their livelihood aside to stand up for the greater good. The lawyers Umar calling for, they need to take a page from your book. And I really want to say well done. I'm proud of you, brother.